Somewhere in China right now, soldiers are standing guard over places so secret that satellite images of them simply vanish. A 2,200-year-old tomb sits sealed beneath booby traps no one dares disturb. An entire city was built inside a mountain and erased from every map. Today, we're counting down 15 places in China where stepping past the gate could cost you your freedom or your life. Zhongnanhai, Beijing's hidden power center. Most tourists who visit Beijing walk right past it without realizing what's behind the wall. Tucked beside the Forbidden City, surrounded by lakes and ancient gardens, sits Zhongnanhai, the real seat of power in modern China. While millions snap photos of the Forbidden City's red gates a few hundred yards away, almost no one gets near this compound, and that's exactly the point. Zhongnanhai isn't a museum or a relic. It's a working compound where China's top leadership lives, meets, and makes decisions that ripple across the globe. Think of it as a combination of the White House, Camp David, and a gated neighborhood, all sealed behind walls that go back centuries. The complex sits on the site of imperial gardens used by emperors for nearly 1,000 years, which means the people running China today are, quite literally, working inside the same grounds as the emperors they replaced. Security here isn't just tight, it's layered. Armed guards patrol the perimeter, checkpoints control every entrance, and surveillance blankets the area in a way that makes most government buildings elsewhere look relaxed by comparison. Photography near the gates is restricted. Lingering too long draws immediate attention, and getting past the outer wall without authorization simply doesn't happen. There's no public tour, no visitor center, no exception process. What makes it even more striking is the contrast. Just outside the walls, tourists wander freely through one of the most visited historic sites on Earth. A few steps closer, and you've crossed into a zone where the rules change completely. For a place that influences decisions affecting over 1 billion people, almost nothing about what actually happens inside ever reaches the outside world. The closest most people will ever get is a photo of the outer gate, and even that requires keeping your distance. The tomb chamber of Qin Shi Huang. Just outside Xi'an sits one of archaeology's biggest temptations and one of its longest-running acts of restraint. Most people know about the Terracotta Army, the 8,000 life-sized clay soldiers buried to guard an emperor in the afterlife. What fewer people realize is that the soldiers aren't even the main event. They're a perimeter. The actual prize, the burial chamber of Emperor Qin Shi Huang himself, sits sealed under a massive earthen mound nearby, and it has never been opened. Not once. Not by archaeologists, not by looters who tried and failed over 2,000 years, not by the Chinese government, which has had the technology to dig for decades and has chosen not to. Ancient records describe a chamber filled with rivers of mercury, a ceiling mapped with pearls representing stars, and crossbow traps rigged to fire on intruders. Modern soil samples around the mound have actually shown mercury levels far higher than the surrounding area, lending real weight to a story that sounds like something out of a movie. So why leave it sealed? Partly caution, partly mercury poisoning risk, but mostly preservation. China watched earlier excavations damage irreplaceable artifacts the moment they hit open air. Paint flaking off terracotta soldiers within minutes of exposure is a famous example. Officials decided some discoveries aren't worth the risk until preservation technology catches up. The site is heavily restricted, guarded, and monitored, with no public access to the tomb mound itself. It's a strange position for a country with a habit of clearing the way for major projects. Here, the oldest emperor's grave has out-stubborned bulldozers, treasure hunters, and 20 centuries of curiosity. Whatever's down there, it stayed exactly where it was buried, and likely will stay that way for a long time to come. Lopi Nur, China's nuclear testing ground. In the far western reaches of Xinjiang sits one of the most desolate, dangerous, and tightly sealed pieces of land anywhere on the planet. Lop Nur was once a massive lake. Today, it's a dried salt basin where, in 1964, China detonated its first atomic bomb. 3 years later, the country's first hydrogen bomb followed in the same general area. Between those two tests, and dozens more that came after, Lop Nur became ground zero for China's entire nuclear weapons program. The region remains off-limits for reasons that go well beyond politics. Radiation contamination lingers in parts of the test zone, and the area has been used for decades as a restricted military and research site. Entry isn't simply discouraged, it's enforced, with checkpoints, military patrols, and a long history of detaining anyone who wanders too close without authorization. Foreign visitors have occasionally tried to reach the area for adventure or curiosity. Few make it far before being turned around, and some accounts describe far less gentle outcomes. Satellite imagery adds another layer of mystery. Researchers monitoring the region over the years have noted gaps and inconsistencies in publicly available satellite coverage, areas that appear blurred, outdated, or conspicuously absent compared to surrounding terrain. Whether that's a deliberate blackout or simply a low-priority mapping zone is something outside observers can only guess at, which is exactly the kind of ambiguity a place like this tends to produce. Beyond the test legacy, Lop Nur also borders sensitive infrastructure tied to ongoing military and rocket testing, making it one of the rare places where Cold War history and modern strategic secrecy overlap directly. It's not a tourist mystery dressed up for effect. It's one of the most genuinely restricted, monitored, and dangerous stretches of ground in the entire country. Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center. Deep in the Gobi Desert, surrounded by hundreds of miles of empty terrain, sits the launch site responsible for putting China's astronauts into orbit. Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center isn't just a rocket pad, it's the birthplace of China's entire space and missile program, operational since the late 1950s and still central to crewed missions today. Every Shenzhou spacecraft carrying Chinese astronauts has lifted off from here. The location wasn't picked by accident. Remote desert terrain means fewer people, easier security, and plenty of empty land for rocket stages to fall safely after launch. But that isolation also makes it one of the most heavily restricted places in the country. The base spans an enormous footprint larger than some small nations, and access is tightly controlled through multiple security perimeters. Military personnel guard the site continuously. An unauthorized approach is treated as a serious security matter, not a minor trespassing issue. Part of what makes Jiuquan particularly sensitive is its dual purpose. The same technology that launches satellites and astronauts into orbit shares deep roots with intercontinental ballistic missile development. Rocket science doesn't really separate cleanly into peaceful and military categories, and that overlap is precisely why facilities like this stay so heavily guarded. Visiting press and foreign delegations are occasionally granted limited, choreographed access during major launches, but that access is a far cry from actually moving freely through the base. For everyone else, the closest most people get is watching footage of a rocket lifting off into the sky from miles away, smoke trailing behind it. The launch itself is broadcast to the world. Everything that happens before that moment, the assembly, the testing, the security protocols protecting it all, stays locked behind gates that don't open for outsiders. The underground Great Wall. Forget the Great Wall most people picture stretching across hilltops. Military analysts have spent years tracking evidence of a very different kind of wall, one that runs underground rather than across the landscape. Often nicknamed the Underground Great Wall, it's believed to be a sprawling tunnel network built to hide and move parts of China's nuclear missile arsenal, stretching for thousands of miles beneath mountainous terrain. The concept is straightforward strategically, even if the scale is staggering. Satellites can spot a missile silo sitting in the open. They can't easily track a mobile missile launcher rolling through a hardened tunnel buried under solid rock. By moving warheads and launch systems through this underground system, the thinking goes, China can complicate any adversary's ability to locate and target its nuclear deterrent in a crisis. It's a strategy rooted in survivability. If they can't find it, they can't strike it first. Confirming the full scope is difficult by design. Much of what's known comes from satellite analysis, leaked engineering details, and reporting built around interviews with people connected to the program, rather than any official tour or public confirmation. Entrances, where they're believed to exist, are guarded, disguised, or built directly into mountainsides in ways that blend into the natural terrain. There's no marked checkpoint to approach, no gate to photograph. The restriction here isn't a fence. It's the fact that most of the network's actual location remains unverified by anyone outside a small circle of military planners. That secrecy is the entire point. A nuclear deterrent only works as deterrence if no one can be completely sure where it is or how much of it exists. The underground Great Wall, real, exaggerated, or somewhere in between, sits at the center of one of the most effective information blackouts tied to any weapons program on Earth. Yulin Naval Base, the mountain that hides submarines. On the southern coast of Hainan Island, past stretches of beach resorts and tropical scenery, sits a base built for an entirely different kind of vacation interruption. Yulin Naval Base is home to part of China's submarine fleet, and tucked into the surrounding mountainside is something most naval bases don't have: a tunnel entrance carved directly into rock, large enough for a submarine to disappear into the mountain itself. Satellite imagery first drew public attention to the cave-like opening years ago, and the implications were immediately clear to defense analysts. A submarine that slips into a covered tunnel can avoid satellite tracking the moment it's inside, making it far harder for rival nations to monitor fleet movements or count exactly how many vessels are stationed there at any given time. For a military strategy built partly around uncertainty, a hidden harbor inside a mountain is about as effective as it gets. The base's location adds to its significance. Hainan sits close to the South China Sea, a region already packed with competing territorial claims and heavy military presence from multiple countries. A submarine base capable of concealing nuclear-powered vessels gives added weight to China's position in those waters and added incentive to keep the base locked down tight. Security around Yulin includes naval patrols, restricted waters, and a no-fly, no-sail buffer zone that leaves no ambiguity about where the boundary sits. Tourists exploring Hainan's resorts are, geographically, not all that far from one of the most secretive naval installations in the region. They'll never know it. The mountain doesn't advertise what's inside it. The patrol boats don't explain themselves. And the gap between beach umbrella and submarine pen stays exactly as wide as the Chinese Navy intends it to. The lost tomb of Genghis Khan. Few mysteries have outlasted as many empires as this one. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, his followers buried him in a location so deliberately hidden that, according to legend, the burial party killed the slaves who dug the grave, then killed the soldiers who killed them, then diverted a river over the site to erase any trace. 8 centuries later, Despite expeditions, satellite surveys, and no shortage of treasure hunting attempts, no one has confirmed where he actually rests. What visitors can see in Ordos, Inner Mongolia, is the Genghis Khan Mausoleum, a grand domed memorial built to honor him. It's worth being clear about what it is and isn't. It's a memorial and cultural site open to visitors, not the actual burial location. The real grave, if intact records and oral tradition are accurate, lies somewhere else entirely, possibly across the border in Mongolia, possibly still within China, guarded by nothing more than centuries of secrecy and a landscape that swallows evidence the way deserts swallow footprints. That hasn't stopped people from trying. Archaeological teams using satellite imaging and remote sensing have scanned vast stretches of grassland and mountain terrain, searching for any anomaly that might mark a hidden tomb. Local tradition in some regions holds that searching for the site at all is taboo, discouraging exploration on cultural and spiritual grounds as much as any official restriction. Whether due to terrain, taboo, sheer scale, or all three, the search keeps coming up empty. What makes this entry different from the others on this list isn't a guard or a fence. It's that the Forbidden Zone might not even have fixed coordinates. Somewhere across hundreds of miles of steppe and mountain, one of history's most consequential rulers rests in a grave that may never be found, by accident or by design. Mer-de-Og County, Tibet's last hidden corner. Tucked into the eastern edge of Tibet, wedged against the border with India, sits a county that resisted modern infrastructure longer than almost anywhere else in China. Medog didn't get a road connecting it to the rest of the country until 2013. Before that, reaching it meant a multi-day trek over mountain passes that were impassable for much of the year, cutting the region off from the outside world for months at a stretch. Even with a road now in place, Medog remains one of the most tightly controlled areas in Tibet. Its location near a disputed, sensitive international border means permits are required for travel there, and foreign visitors face additional layers of approval that can take weeks to clear when they're granted at all. The region sits within a broader zone where Chinese authorities maintain a heavy military and administrative presence, citing both border security and the genuinely treacherous terrain as justification. The geography alone explains part of the caution. Medog sits in a deep gorge carved by the Yarlung Changpo River, surrounded by dense forest, landslide-prone slopes, and some of the most extreme elevation changes anywhere on the planet. The road in is still considered one of the most dangerous drives in the country, prone to closure from landslides, flooding, and avalanche risk depending on the season. Even with official permission, getting there is its own kind of obstacle course. What makes Medog notable on a list like this isn't a guarded gate or a missile silo. It's a place where nature did most of the forbidding long before any checkpoint existed, and where the government's restrictions and the landscape's restrictions now work in tandem to keep outsiders firmly on the outside. Mount Kailash, the peak no one is allowed to climb. Most mountains exist to be climbed. Mount Kailash exists specifically not to be. Rising sharply from the Tibetan plateau, this peak is considered sacred across four major religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and the indigenous Bon tradition, each of which holds that the summit is forbidden territory, reserved for the divine rather than for human footprints. Unlike most entries on this list, the restriction here didn't start with a government decree. It started with belief, and it's held for centuries. Pilgrims travel from across Asia to walk the roughly 32-mile circuit around the base of the mountain, a journey some complete through prostration, a grueling form of devotion that can take weeks. What they don't do, what no one does, is attempt the summit itself. Several foreign climbing expeditions have requested permission over the decades. Every request has been denied, and that denial lines up neatly with both religious tradition and the practical reality of operating in a heavily monitored border region. That's where the government layer comes in. Mount Kailash sits in a remote stretch of western Tibet, close enough to sensitive border areas that travel, permits, checkpoints, and monitored routes are standard for anyone visiting, faith-driven pilgrim or curious traveler alike. Security personnel maintain a visible presence along the pilgrimage route, less to prevent worship and more to manage a strategically sensitive region that happens to also be one of the most spiritually significant sites on the continent. The result is a rare overlap, a mountain that the faithful won't climb out of reverence, and that the state won't let anyone climb out of policy. Two completely different reasons for restriction, pointing at the exact same outcome on the exact same patch of forbidden rock. The hidden nuclear cities of the Third Line. During the 1960s, fearing potential attack from both the Soviet Union and the United States, China launched a massive, secretive construction effort known as the Third Line. The plan: relocate entire factories, weapons labs, and even whole cities deep into mountainous interior provinces, far from coastal areas vulnerable to invasion, and bury much of it inside the mountains themselves. What resulted was a network of hidden industrial cities, some housing tens of thousands of workers, built directly into tunnel systems and mountainside complexes. Workers lived, manufactured weapons, and conducted sensitive research in facilities that didn't appear on any public map. Entire towns existed essentially off the books, identified only by code numbers rather than names, a practice that left some locations obscure even decades later. Some of these sites were involved in components of China's nuclear weapons program, designed specifically to survive a strike that might destroy more exposed conventional facilities. Many third-line sites were declassified and abandoned or converted to other uses, as Cold War tensions eased and the strategic need for hidden mountain cities diminished. But not all of them. Some locations remain restricted, either still serving military or research functions, or simply left under official secrecy out of institutional habit, even after their original purpose faded. Local residents in some regions can point toward a mountain and mention that something is in there, without being entirely sure what, a kind of openly acknowledged uncertainty that's almost stranger than total secrecy would be. It's a uniquely Cold War kind of forbidden zone, born from a fear of invasion that never came, leaving behind tunnels, factories, and code-numbered towns scattered through mountain ranges that, to this day, haven't fully given up their records to public history. Sansha City and the South China Sea outposts. In the middle of the South China Sea sits a city that didn't exist in any meaningful form a couple of decades ago. Sansha is China's administrative center for a sprawling, contested stretch of ocean built largely on reclaimed land and artificial islands constructed from dredged sand and coral. What started as small outposts has grown into a network of installations complete with runways, ports, and military infrastructure. The South China Sea is one of the most disputed bodies of water on the planet, with overlapping territorial claims from China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. China has built up several of the islands and reefs it controls into heavily fortified positions, and access to most of them is tightly restricted, both for foreign nationals and, in many cases, for Chinese civilians without specific authorization. Military and Coast Guard vessels patrol the surrounding waters, and approaching certain islands without clearance has led to vessels being intercepted, monitored, or turned away entirely. What makes these outposts particularly sensitive is their dual function. Officially, much of the activity centers on fishing administration, weather monitoring, and civilian infrastructure. Satellite imagery and defense analysis, however, have repeatedly identified military-grade construction, including radar installations, missile shelters, and runways long enough to accommodate fighter jets and surveillance aircraft. The combination of disputed sovereignty and confirmed military buildup makes this one of the more geopolitically charged entries on this list, with multiple nations watching the region closely and periodically sailing through contested waters to assert their own claims. For ordinary travelers, the South China Sea outposts aren't a curiosity stop. They're a heavily monitored, frequently disputed military zone where the rules of who's allowed where shift depending on which country you ask, and where getting too close by sea or by air tends to attract serious attention fast. The Forbidden City's sealed underground vaults. It's right there in the name, and most visitors assume the Forbidden City earned its title purely from history. Walk through it today, and it's one of the most visited tourist sites in the world, packed with crowds photographing red pillars and gold rooftops. But beneath all that history and foot traffic, persistent accounts describe sealed chambers and storage vaults that remain off-limits even to most museum staff. For nearly 5 centuries, the Forbidden City served as the political and ceremonial heart of Imperial China, home to 2 dynasties' worth of emperors who, by tradition, kept the general public out entirely, hence the name. Today's restrictions are different in nature, but similar in effect. Certain underground areas, believed by some historians and museum insiders to contain imperial treasures, sealed records, or structurally unstable sections of the centuries-old foundation, remain closed to the public and to most staff without specific authorization. Officials have cited a mix of reasons over the years for keeping these areas sealed. Structural concerns in a complex built largely from wood and stone centuries ago, ongoing preservation work that's slow by design, and a cautious approach to artifacts that could be damaged the moment they're exposed to modern air and humidity, echoing the same caution applied to the nearby terracotta warriors. Whatever the precise mix of reasons, the result is the same. Tourists wandering one of the most photographed palaces on Earth are, in some sections, walking directly above spaces that have stayed sealed for longer than most countries have existed. It's a reminder that forbidden doesn't always mean a guarded fence in a remote desert. Sometimes it means a locked door a few feet beneath a gift shop. Inside a palace, millions of people visit every single year without ever realizing what they're standing on top of. The disputed islands no one can fully claim. A cluster of small, mostly uninhabited islands in the East China Sea has become one of the most closely watched flashpoints in the region, despite having almost nothing on them but rock, scrub vegetation, and the occasional seabird colony. Known as the Diaoyu Islands in China and the Senkaku Islands in Japan, these islets are claimed by both nations, with Taiwan asserting its own claim as well, and the dispute has simmered for decades without resolution. There's no permanent population, no infrastructure to speak of, and no tourism industry. What there is, consistently, is a rotating presence of Coast Guard vessels, naval patrols, and surveillance aircraft from multiple countries, each asserting its claim by simply showing up. Civilian boats that attempt to land on the islands, whether for activism, fishing, or simple curiosity, have repeatedly been intercepted, escorted away, or detained, regardless of which country's vessel reaches them first. The stakes go beyond pride or symbolism. The surrounding waters are believed to hold significant fishing resources and potential undersea energy reserves, and control over the islands carries implications for maritime boundary lines that stretch far beyond the rocks themselves. That combination of resource potential and national prestige has kept tensions simmering at a level that occasionally spikes into serious diplomatic standoffs, with naval vessels shadowing each other at close range in contested waters. For ordinary travelers, this isn't a place you stumble into by accident. There are no scheduled tours, no ferry routes, no legal way to simply visit. The islands sit at the center of a dispute large enough to involve multiple governments and navies over a patch of land too small to support so much as a permanent settlement, proving that forbidden sometimes has less to do with size and everything to do with what a piece of land represents. The guarded border towns along the Yalu River. Along China's northeastern border, the city of Dandong sits on one bank of the Yalu River. On the other bank, in plain view, is North Korea. It's one of the only places on Earth where you can stand in one country and look directly across the water at one of the most isolated nations in the world. And that proximity makes the entire border region one of the most closely monitored stretches of land in China. Tourist boats run short river cruises that hug the Chinese side of the Yalu, giving visitors a glimpse from a careful distance of North Korean territory across the water. That's about as close as casual travelers get. Surrounding villages and stretches of riverbank are restricted zones, patrolled regularly by Chinese border security, monitoring both smuggling activity and the periodic, often dangerous, crossings attempted by people fleeing North Korea. Approaching certain sections of the border without authorization draws immediate attention from patrols on alert around the clock. The sensitivity here cuts in multiple directions. China maintains the relationship with North Korea carefully, balancing diplomatic ties with the practical reality of policing a border that sees illegal crossings, smuggling networks, and periodic military tension on the other side. For Chinese authorities, keeping the border zone tightly controlled serves several purposes at once: managing refugee flows, preventing smuggling, and avoiding incidents that could spiral into a larger diplomatic problem. Locals in Dandong go about ordinary daily life, shopping, working, raising families within sight of one of the most closed societies on the planet. It's a strange kind of normal, built around a border that looks calm on the surface, photographed constantly by curious tourists on river cruises, while remaining one of the most heavily watched and least forgiving stretches of frontier anywhere in the country. The secret city that built China's bomb. Hidden deep in the mountains of Sichuan province, a facility known for decades only by a code number, Factory 821, operated as one of the most secretive nuclear research and production sites in the country's history. Built into tunnels carved through solid rock, starting in the 1960s, it played a direct role in producing material for China's nuclear weapons program, all while officially not existing on any public document or map. For more than 3 decades, the people who worked there lived under conditions of total secrecy, unable to tell family members what they actually did for a living, identified by code names rather than positions, operating machinery inside mountain tunnels designed to survive a direct military strike. The facility was finally declassified in the early 2000s, decades after it stopped active production, and parts of it have since been converted into a tourist attraction and museum, allowing visitors a rare, curated look into a Cold War-era nuclear program most countries keep sealed indefinitely. Even with that partial opening, large sections remain closed to the public, either for safety reasons tied to radioactive material handling decades ago, or because certain areas still hold sensitive equipment and records that authorities aren't ready to display. The contrast is striking. A gift shop and guided tour exist a short walk from tunnels that, not long ago, would have meant immediate detention for anyone who wandered in without clearance. It's a fitting final entry for this list, a place that captures exactly how secrecy works in modern China. Total and absolute for decades, then selectively, carefully unsealed once the strategic value fades, leaving behind a museum built inside what used to be one of the most forbidden mountains in the entire country. 15 places, and not one of them is forbidden by accident. Some are sealed for military secrecy, missile tunnels, and submarine pens designed to stay invisible by design. Some are sealed by nature itself, mountain passes and river gorges that make access dangerous long before any guard shows up. Others are sealed by belief, sacred ground that stayed untouched for reasons that have nothing to do with government policy at all. And a few are sealed simply because nobody, including the people in charge, is entirely sure what's still down there or what might happen if they let the world find out. What ties them together isn't China specifically. It's a pattern that shows up anywhere power, history, and mystery overlap. The places that matter most are usually the places kept furthest from view. A locked gate tells you something is valuable. A blacked-out satellite image tells you it might be dangerous. A legend that survived 8 centuries tells you people still care enough to keep looking, even when looking gets them nowhere. Most of these places will likely stay sealed for years, maybe generations, maybe permanently. A handful might eventually open the way Factory 821 did decades after the secrecy stopped mattering. Until then, they remain exactly what this list promised. Places you're not getting into, no matter how curious you are. Which one of these surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into the places, machines, and stories most people never get to see, hit subscribe and stick around for the next one.